Hello everyone, this is Sumerian, and this is episode 8, I believe, of building a toy box from scratch. And our toy box is coming along pretty nice so far. We finally added some sky dome and a bit of theming, and we've done a little bit of decorating. Not much yet, it's still something we're going to move on more with later. Um, I looked through some power discs earlier, and I'm really thinking I might throw a bit of the Peter Pan decoration down, maybe a bit of Lion King, and definitely I want to use Dinosaur World terrain to get some real jungle-like vegetation going on in here. But in this episode, we're not going to focus on decorating that up anymore. We're going to focus on putting obstacles along our path here. That's going to be the goal of today. Because so far it's pretty darn easy. A townsperson just walks straight across here. There's nothing in the way. There's nothing to stop it. There's nothing uh, to really hamper our game at all. So there's no reason to even need to move the townsperson. So it really makes it a boring game. So what we're going to do is we're going to modify this train a bit again, and then we're going to add some obstacles. Now I have looked at this already. I haven't modified it yet, but I have some pretty good ideas where I want to actually just remove some terrain, just have some holes that the townsperson can fall through. So you'll see I've put some blocks down here to represent where I think I want these holes. And from what I'm seeing is one of the holes would be sort of here. It looks like that would be a hole, and then there would be a hole right here. So I have to get rid of this big block. Maybe use one of these pieces. And then maybe use one of these pieces. And finish her off with one of these. So that gives me a hole here. And the reason I'm picking here is because it gives you time. Your character the townsperson starts here. Your camera can come all the way to this line here. So it gives you up until this point here to get your camera over here and either move the townsperson above or below this hole. So I want another hole somewhere here. And it looks like it's somewhere in here. I want the hole here and here. Okay, so I'm thinking put a block there, put a block there, a block there, and I think that is what I was asking for. There, and there. Gives me, because I'm thinking the easy route here would be if you come over, you move the townsperson up, and they have a clear shot all the way down. Because if you move them down, you actually have to be careful because I might fall off the edge here. But if you move them up, so the player's naturally going to want to move them up, except here there's going to be another possible pitfall. So up suddenly perhaps doesn't become the best option. But if you go down, you have the possibility of falling off even quicker. So it's going to be a gamble one way or the other. So really, I only think I want the two holes in the terrain here. These will be at the very start of the game. These holes will be present. But as the game progresses, I'm going to want, because the idea is to have some fires raging in the jungle here. The entire idea is that the jungle is on fire and the animals are racing to the water, which is safety. And you're trying to guide them to get there. So I'm thinking as the game progresses, what'll happen is fires will start to blaze on the savannah here in different places. And if the townsperson hits that fire, they will be defeated. They will not make it to the water. So if a townsperson falls into a hole or runs into an active fire, we want them to be defeated so they don't make it to the end here. So how many fires do we want? We're going to pull out a locator here, and we're going to, here I know this locator isn't attached to a path or anything, and if I grab the locator and put it back down, I now have my tool directly on the locator. So how many locators and where should we put them is really one of the thoughts here. Now, I'm almost thinking if we break out with a fire right here, then you would have to quickly move the townsperson up, but that's still generally safe. I'm thinking if we keep the fires more concentrated on this end, we can make it more complicated to dodge them. This is my first thought. So, what if we put a fire? If we put a fire somewhere along here, that would be one good spot for a fire, I would think. Another would be perhaps the person tries to move their townsperson down and just skirts the line, and the townsperson makes it all the way across over to here. So I'm thinking another great place for a fire would be right around here. There's a good place for a fire to break out. Here would be interesting because the person might get used to doing a bounce above, bounce below, and if you hit the angle just right, the townsperson, you can leave them alone and they'll go the whole way through. But if they weren't expecting a fire to pop up here, that might cause them some grief and make them have to control the townsperson even farther. Because I'm trying to make sure that you can't just come to right about here with your camera and with some proper control move the townsperson around this obstacle and then line them up so they have a straight shot all the way to the safety of the water. So that means I want a fire to break out somewhere right around here as well. I'm going to move that over just a bit more. I might actually move that one over, and I might move this one over a bit more too. Like that. Give you room to at least negotiate around these fires. Okay. And let's have another fire somewhere out here. Why not right around, right on the main path before they even get to that first hole. So they get used to just coming to right before this hole and moving the townsperson last second. And this fire erupts and make sure they can't do that quite as well anymore. Okay, I like it. Alright, so we have 5 locators down so far, and what we're going to do is we're going to start doing some logic for them. Now the idea is they're all going to be a dynamic trigger, and so I will do 5 dynamic triggers. And to keep track of these, how we're going to hook them up is I'm going to hook up them to the locator that is closest also in this direction. So as this dynamic trigger is the furthest to the left, I'm going to find the locator that's furthest to the left and make that the locator for that dynamic trigger. Now, honestly, it doesn't really, at this point, except for the timing, it doesn't really matter which dynamic trigger is attached to what locator. But for the timing, if we want specific ones to start up first, it does make it easier for us to find which dynamic locator we're looking for. So that guy, and then the fourth one. I believe was him. And that's the locator for the dynamic trigger down there. So last. Okay, so we're gonna have 5 dynamic triggers here. Now, what we're gonna do first is I'm gonna grab a couple buttons for some testing. And as we get further in the game, it is looking like we're getting a lot of buttons here, but a lot of these buttons we're going to get rid of once we actually start tying all the gameplay together. But for now, I like having the buttons so I can test things one at a time. So, oh, I moved. Okay, what I want to see right this second is I want to see, A, what's the best fire effect we can use? We're going to want an effect generator for every dynamic trigger, but I'm just going to test one for now. So, fire, we should have a couple here. Smoky flame, smoldering fire, brazier flame. Let's see what a brazier flame looks like. I'm thinking they mean something along the lines of a torch, but who knows. And let's just see what it looks like without putting it on a locator first. We'll get a general idea. I kind of like that. I kind of like that a lot. I like that. It's a very good size for what I was thinking. Let's check the other ones anyway. See the difference between the smoldery and smoky. I know I don't want a green flame. Yeah, that's not going to do anything. It's also not bad. That's actually not bad at all either. Now I'm torn. And watch the last one be even better. I don't want to be torn. I want one to grab me and say, this is the best one to use. I want to know right away. Yeah, I don't want that one. So that one I don't want. Nice fire, but not for what I'm looking for here. Now I think this one is slightly bigger than the smoldering fire. I think it's going to be this one. But let's put it on a locator and then look at it up there. So we are going to hook this up to the same locator we just hooked the dynamic trigger up to. I'm going to hook it up there. Let's start that fire going. So how big are we going to make the dynamic trigger area around this fire? Now, because the locator right here is halfway in that block, if I set it to 2, that means it'll be circular trigger area where the edge will be at the edge of this block, and the other edge will be the edge of this block, and it'll also reach about halfway to here and halfway to here. So that would be a dynamic trigger of 2. We don't want to make it too difficult, we just don't want to make it too easy. So I'm thinking a dynamic trigger area of 2 with that kind of flame is looking good. But I'm going to just make life annoying on myself because I'm still torn. I'm going to make that one smoldering fire, and I'm going to make this button so it'll turn them both off. And I'll attach this locator to the second one there. And actually, while we're at it, let's attach them all. And then we have number 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we'll do number 5. And I'm already beginning to think we're not going to get as far as I was thinking we are, because I'm used to working at a certain speed. When I'm talking about it, I'm just not working at the same speed. But that's fine. It's good. I'm finding it's kind of helpful talking a little bit more about what I'm doing aloud than I usually do. So I want to push that button and see what the 2 fires look like up there. And then we'll move on a bit more with the logic. Oh, I turned it off before I even went to look. One of those days, I guess. Alright. So we got a fire here, and we got a fire there. Oh, man, they both look nice. I could do different ones, I guess. I was going to say the advantage appears to be that this one seems lower to the ground than that one does. But then when I think about it, my camera's up there, so that angle might really not matter. Yeah, you can't really tell there. Okay, that camera angle helps me. I prefer the one to the far left than I do the closer one. I think that one is bigger and just looks better from that angle. So that's the fire type we're going to use. So hooray. Now, we're going to set up the dynamic triggers and the effect generators, and then we may save the rest of the logic for the next episode, because there's a little bit we have to do here. So as I was saying, in a dynamic trigger, you got to tell it what the target, or what's going to be the center, where's that dynamic trigger going to be centered. So we're going to do locator, obviously, for all of them. But as I was saying, we're looking at doing a trigger distance of 2, because when we sized it out there, it seems a relatively decent size for the area. And if you go much farther, then they're going to be getting caught in fire that's nowhere near that big, which just will seem weird. So let's set the properties on all of them first. I like to make sure I get things done. I like to do all of something before I move on to the next thing, and then I do all of that. It just makes sure I don't forget something. And I'm going to try to keep talking while I'm doing this, but I might start mumbling, and you'll hear me mumbling numbers, because I usually keep track. I know there's 5 dynamic triggers, and right now I would probably be saying 4, just to remind myself I'm on number 4. I need to do another one. Just my own craziness, I guess, kicking in of how I keep track of everything when I'm doing it. And we are now on the last dynamic trigger. Okay, trigger distance of 2. Now what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be setting it so that the dynamic triggers are going to start in the game. They're all going to be off. And we're probably going to do that with a level starter, which I'll drop now. Why not? Now, level starter is a tool that only fires when you first load the toy box. It's the only time it'll fire, and generally it only fires once. I haven't tested it as much in 3.0, but in 2.0 I had it so that a level starter would actually double fire every now and then, and it would usually make sure it did it in the box I really didn't want it to. It was only supposed to fire once, which would ruin things. So what I usually do with a level starter is I'll say catalyze, and catalyze only fires when you first load the box and the player finally appears. You know, the box loads and it spins around, and then it has a glowy area over the end symbol, and then when your player finally appears and says something, that's when the level starter will fire. So I'm going to say when it does fire, it's going to input to a logic AND, and because a logic AND will only fire once unless you reset it. and I'm never going to reset this one. So it will only fire when the box first starts. And so when it first starts, I'm going to turn off all of those dynamic triggers right there. I don't want them on because they're going to be set to defeat the enemy, and we only want that to happen if we've reached the time period where that fire is going to start. So the easiest way to do this, let's just turn them all off. Now, if it was a trigger area, I would probably go in a whole different route, but I'm really loving these new dynamic triggers because there's one very important logic connection you can do on them that you can't do on a trigger area. And that logic connection is when it's turned on or off. And I love using that logic connection on these dynamic triggers, and we're actually going to use them in this box. What we're going to be doing is saying, if this dynamic trigger comes on, that means I want this fire burning. So that means start the brazier flame. And I also want to say, if for some reason I turn that dynamic trigger off, stop looping that effect. So I'm actually controlling the fire effect from the dynamic triggers. So when we later get into deciding when to turn these fires on, all I have to do is send them on to the appropriate dynamic trigger, and it's going to start the fire going itself. So it'll take care of all the logic for us just by turning that dynamic trigger on. So we're going to do that with all of them to the effects generators above them. So again, we're going to say the brazier flame looped, and if you turn off, stop looping the effects. And this is number 3, and like I said, crazy me is going to start saying numbers because that's how I track these things. And fire brazier and the off. And like I was saying, I think this is going to, once we have these in, this is going to be the end of this episode because I think we've been going on for a bit already. Like I said, it took a little longer than I was expecting, but I sometimes forget. We have 5 dynamic triggers and 5 special effects generators and 5 locators going up there. It sometimes takes a while just to hook all that stuff up, which there's nothing wrong with that. It takes the time it's going to need to take. But we are here on the last dynamic trigger. On is going to loop the fire brazier effect. I really hope I'm saying that right, and I'm not about to get mocked in the comments for continually saying that. And off is going to stop looping effect. So there we go. Now we've got it set up so when the level first starts, the dynamic triggers will shut off. And when they shut off, they stop looping the effects of the effect generators above them. When we do eventually start turning them on, that will turn on the effects generator. And I think in the next tutorial, we'll also deal with the logic of when the townsperson enters these dynamic trigger areas. One more thing I want to attach to this level starter. I kind of wanted level starter a little earlier, but this is the perfect time to add it. I'm also going to say when it's complete, when the box first loads, I hate the fact, it's driving me crazy, that the camera's showing up here, the locator's showing up here, and then the dynamic trigger locator, for some reason, is over. It was over here or something when we first started. I don't know why. So I just want to say when the box first loads, please, please, please reset and stop a path so they're in the proper place and it doesn't drive me nutty anymore. Okay, so there we go. We've got our dynamic triggers, we've got our effects generators, we've got a level starter in here, and that's what we're going to do for now. In the next episode, we're actually going to continue on with this logic and start timing it and putting in what's going to happen when the townsperson crosses into that dynamic trigger area. But for now, I hope this episode's been helpful to you, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you for tuning in.